Welcome to the Pain, Performance, and Pojada podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nick Smith. I'm a licensed physical therapist and strength and conditioning coach for Jiu Jitsu and other combat athletes. Your boy's no longer Natty, and I haven't been Natty for about a year now. And if you guys read the caption or the title, I want to talk today about TRT. TRT is something that has kind of become part of the culture of Jiu Jitsu, especially amongst the Masters division athletes. And I, as a Masters athlete, can speak to this. And, to preface my story a little bit, and what I want to talk about today is more of what my original preconceived notions were about TRT, steroid use in sports. And then I kind of want to talk about how that shifted and how my focus on health has drastically changed in the last decade. And then I want to talk about the implications of the stigma of TRT and being natty and some of the common myths around hormone replacement therapy. And then I want to dive into my story about how this all came to be, why I started TRT, what was the educated decisions that I had to make, and what that process has been like over the past year as I come up on around my 1 year anniversary of starting, and how I've kind of become an advocate for men's health and hormones moving forward for the community. So hope you guys stick around and listen to this, because whether you're coming from the side of the fence of TRT is cheating, which is where I kind of used to come from, to my more nuanced approach to it, I hope that I can gather some information that you can use and be an advocate to be ahead on your own health, ultimately what I'm hoping for today. So without further ado, I'm going to crack some jokes and going to dive into some pretty intense stuff that I dealt with, including depression, other feelings, emotions that I had during this whole process, and dealing with medical professionals and how horrible the medical community can be in terms of trying to get help and advocate for their patients. And I'm sure some of you have had very similar experiences yourself. So at the end of this, I hope you learned a little bit more and I can answer some questions for you. My TRT experience, steroid use, was always, this is for performance. I knew that, it was mostly for bodybuilding at that time. And then I come to kind of find out, hey, grew up in the 90s, so saw the baseball scandal. Got to watch the early 2000s, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, when everybody's hitting home runs. So baseball had their thing with steroid use. I also grew up during the era of Lance Armstrong, being that I come from a cycling background, knowing that EPO, he was taking performance-enhancing drugs to improve his cycling, only later to find out that is very much prevalent in the entire sport. But at the time, I had this almost virtue signaling opinion on it, like, oh, that, you take steroids, that's cheating, right? I didn't feel that way with bodybuilding because everybody was doing it, and it's kind of known, like, unless you're in a drug-tested federation, everybody's on the juice, and that's fine. And I knew that my favorite WWE stars growing up were on the juice. So, it kind of got to the point where I knew, hey, steroids, there's a stigma around not being the best in terms of your health. It could kill you if you don't take care of it appropriately. And as I got older and kind of researched a little bit more about what these different things do, I started to kind of realize that I was lumping everything into this funnel of PEDs. And yes, there are compounds of anabolic steroids that affect your testosterone. EPO has a different driver of how it affects the body and human performance. But when it comes to TRT, I think there's a stigma, and as I said, this is something I grew up with too, thinking that that is purely from a state of performance. And hormone replacement therapy, or having the appropriate hormones of testosterone, estrogen, all those things, doesn't just play a role in your performance, but a lot of different processes in your body, including, mood regulation, metabolism, sleep, sexual health, all those things. So if your testosterone is off, those mess up a lot of different things in your body. And they're coming to find out that inappropriate testosterone levels can lead to other secondary problems, heart problems, metabolic diseases, all those things. So having your hormones in balance and check is really important as a man. For some reason in our medical community, there's also this division between, women's hormones are dealt with all the time, whether it's, contraceptives of birth control or women going through menopause. I'm not the person to speak on those specific hormones dealing with women, but in terms of men, we need to be treating it with the same kind of intensity because of the ramifications of having an imbalance in those hormones. So growing up as an athlete, I participated in sports. And one of the sports that I did participate in, had I gone to compete in a certain organization, they would have drug tested at some point at the professional level. BMX racing under the UCI, and even the IOC, because it ended up becoming an Olympic sport. Some of the guys I raced as a youth ended up on our Olympic team. If I continued down that path and happened to race, there would have been a chance that I would have been drug tested. I would have been under that umbrella, competing at that level. The other ball sports that I competed in, I wasn't good enough, but yes, I know to some degree there's some drug testing that's involved. Football, basketball, baseball, volleyball. Actually, I don't know about volleyball. But I definitely know that the NBA and the NFL are supposed to be doing drug testing. They say they are. I'm sure there's some people that are slipping under the radar. And then I also participated in powerlifting, and I participated in a organization, the USAPL, which is under the IPF. They follow WADA, so they are a drug-tested federation as well. I've never taken anything up to that point. I've just never got into it. There were thoughts of it. It didn't really cross my mind. In my 20s, I remember reflecting back and being pretty much treating my body like an amusement park. I was exercising, but I could basically eat and drink whatever I want, and I'd be in relatively good shape. I remember being in PT school and being able to consume a fair bit of alcohol and wake up the next day and be totally fine, which is insane to think about now, being in my mid-30s. If I even look at a beer, I pay for it the next day. Not necessarily like a hangover, but I feel like absolute dog shit for the next day. So if I enjoy a beer, it's 2 days, I'm done. I don't participate particularly well. So I just kind of avoid it. I started to notice some symptom changes for the worse around the time that my daughter was born. She's almost 3 now. So about 3 years ago, I started to have a really tough time with a handful of different things. I chalk this up to I'm a tired parent. Very reasonable. Not getting a normal sleep schedule, being up in 90-minute intervals and waking up, going back to bed, waking up. I never got a consistent more than 3-4 hours at a time. And the symptoms that I were having were definitely a byproduct of bad sleep. I wasn't recovering well from my workouts. I didn't feel particularly good in Jiu Jitsu all the time. And, recovering from my weightlifting, I just kind of felt sore. I was getting banged up a little bit more. And I just kind of chalked it up like, hey, I'm burnt out. I'm trying to run a business. I'm trying to, keep my baby alive at all costs. And I just really thought it was to that. And then we got to a point where we started, kind of sleep training my daughter. And, after a couple weeks of that, she started to sleep through the night consistently. And then I proceeded to get, more regular sleep. I had even worked up to a point where I was going to bed early, 9:30 at the latest, getting 7-8 hours a night. But I was still feeling incredibly tired. Wake up the following morning, just could not get out of bed. And during that time also, I was feeling awfully depressed. I like to think that I'm a pretty up person. I like to joke. I'm more happy-go-lucky. And I went through a period of time where I felt like a cloud was just following me around. Of course, I have downtimes. Everybody does. But I usually bounce back within a couple days. This would go on for weeks at a time where I just could not. If something bad would happen, I would just hang on to it. Just miserable. Really, really down bad. Worse than I'd ever been. And at that point, I was like, something's off. I don't feel normal. And I couldn't pawn it off on, hey, you have a crappy sleep schedule. Like, your baby's not sleeping through the night. Of course you feel like this. Now I'm getting consistent sleep. At this time, I had pretty much completely eliminated alcohol. And I am doing a very vigorous job of eating well, making sure my hydration is up. I'm exercising 6 times a week between Jiu Jitsu and lifting weights. I'm technically in the best shape of my life at that time, and I still feel like shit. What the heck? So at that point, this is in October of 2023. Yeah, October of 2023. And, I had this conversation with my wife. I was like, hey, I feel like shit. I'm going to be 35 next year. Maybe it's time I, get a little wellness check, get some blood work done, make sure that nothing is going on, make sure that everything's in working order. I shouldn't be feeling like this. So I go through Kaiser Permanente, for those of you who are not in California, Colorado, Hawaii, Virginia, Oregon, Washington, I think. It's a pretty big medical group. My wife is a physical therapist for Kaiser Permanente, so our benefits go through them. And, my wife asked, like, hey, can you go through insurance? Because wellness blood work is free. We pay for it through the insurance premium. So I hit up my doc, get on a phone call with him, and just kind of let him know what's going on. Like, hey, man, not recovering well from my workouts. Don't feel particularly good. And, I let him know about the depression stuff. Like, I was like, hey, I've never been this sad before. Not good. Thinking about some pretty dark shit. I would really like to get these things looked at just to make sure nothing's going on. I want to make sure my hormones are in balance, all that stuff. So I asked, to get a blood work panel and see if I can get testosterone done. Now, prior to this phone conversation, it'd been a couple months. I knew that something was kind of off. I had started to gather some information from some of my teammates and come to find out that they have been going through similar things and they have been doing testosterone replacement therapy. I'm like, interesting. Okay. And I knew, I was like, hey, I noticed there's a couple of my friends who kind of got strong. And, you train with them routinely, and they're like, wow, man, you're getting pretty strong. I noticed your mood is up. Like, hey, what's going on? Like, oh, dude, my testosterone was low. I started going to TRT. Feel a lot better now. Sweet. So talked to a handful of friends, get to know about their stories a little bit, and there were some definite overlaps, in terms of, down mood. Sexual appetites is kind of down, not really as stoked as they used to be. And just not recovering, just always feeling tired all the time. So after, doing some of that, I was like, hey, well, maybe my testosterone is low. So I'm going to start kind of changing some things, start taking some natural supplements that I'd read about, did some research on, like, what are some things that, people are doing. And, started making some changes in that regard, making sure that I'm hitting all my different micronutrients, making sure I'm getting a vitamin D, and went through the whole thing. So there was a period of time between that October when I had this realization that I needed to get some help, that I was going to start making some changes to see if I can influence my hormones or just try to see if there was some natural testosterone producing even before I got blood work done. And so after having the conversation with the doctor, I requested the blood panel. He refused to do hormone therapy, or not therapy. He refused to test the testosterone, which I'm like, okay, why? Like, he's like, well, I don't think it's that. I think it's sleep apnea. So I'm going to hire you a sleep study. I'm like, great, fine. That's good. Let's be thorough. But he refused. And I kind of knew that was going to happen based on what my friends had said. So I eventually got the blood work done. Everything came back great. No issues with my heart. Metabolic stuff is good. Triglycerides were good. Cholesterol, everything good. Clean bill of health. Like, yeah, man, you're in good shape. I did get my sleep study done as well, and I did have mild apnea. I'm like, okay. Mild, they're like, you don't need a CPAP in this case. This can be corrected with the mouthpiece. So at that point, I'm like, there's no way that mild apnea could make me feel this awful. So at that point, I had been recommended by a couple people to check out a place that would do my blood work outside of network. And I went to the Mark Men's Health in Chino Hills. A couple of the guys who work there run the place. They train at the Jiu Jitsu gym that I am currently filming this in, and I'm looking at the mats right now. So they're teammates. I've trained with them before, and there's a lot of people from the gym that go to them for their hormone replacement therapy. So I had a recommendation from a really close friend of mine who's been a teammate since my very first day of jiu-jitsu. I trust him with a lot of things. He said, hey, check them out. Just get your blood work done from them. See if anything pops up. I'm like, oh. So I had no intention of actually starting TRT. I just wanted to know information, where it's at. Because if it was something that was modifiable through more means, or if they'd given me some advice on, here's some natural supplementation, anything, I wanted to take their advice before I jumped into that, even though I was kind of already doing things on my own. So I get to that point, get the blood work done, comes back, and my testosterone levels are in the low 200s, 231 to be exact. And reading that number, I'm just like, what? Like, dude, I'm 34. Like, from what I read, like 200s level, like you treat your body like shit. You're not taking care of yourself. And like I said, my preconceived notion on this before is TRT is for steroids. It's for performance. Not realizing that there's a large genetic component to this that I've completely overlooked. And how was I supposed to know? I'm young. So now, like, reflecting on this, hearing this number, like, hey man, anything below 500, you might start to see some of the symptoms you've brought up. Since you have a clean bill of health, with everything else that we've seen at this point, you would definitely be a candidate for having hormone replacement therapy. And at that point, I started to feel a couple different ways. One, there was a little bit of shame and guilt as to, like, what's wrong with me? Like, I never took any kind of crazy drugs. I stopped drinking alcohol pretty much entirely. I exercise routinely. I eat really well. Sure, I'm not perfect, but, for the most part, I treat my body pretty well. So to have such low testosterone, I'm like, this is something that happens to people who don't give a shit about themselves. And I was the opposite of that. I think it's important to be fit. Now that I'm a coach for athletes, like, I want to set a standard of, like, this is my expectation for myself. I can set that standard for those I work with. So there's like a shame and guilt piece of that. And then there was a ton of fear also, because knowing at this point that if I were to start this TRT, I would be taking it essentially potentially for the rest of my life. And the finality of that is a little scary. Like, hey, I'm going to be dependent on this moving forward, potentially. So the guys over at the Mark, Bob and Russ, kind of ran me through my numbers and let me know what my options were. Sat with it for a couple days, really thinking about, like, what's the best option here. I've done these things from a natural standpoint, didn't see any changes. The numbers still came back really low, and they weren't like moderately low, like they're really, really low. And they're saying, ideally, I want to be up towards 800. So basically 4 times what I had at that time. And some doctors, depending on who you're talking to, normal physiological range, Kaiser will say anything like around like 350, I believe, 3 or 350, I can't remember the number, upwards to like 1200. So if you're operating in that physiological level, you're doing pretty good. It's such a wide gamut. So really it kind of has to go on your symptoms and making sure you're not having any odd side effects from if you are taking things exogenously. So after some time, some consideration, thinking about things, sitting with my emotions, I decided to start. Started with a dose of HCG and testosterone cypionate. And the HCG, for those of you who don't know, is an injection to make sure that your testicles still continue to produce testosterone naturally. So it's making sure that you still do that. It also helps you kind of determine if you were to take HCG in isolation, because there's some people who do this first, it will let you know if your testicles are actually the thing that are not producing the testosterone. So is it a central problem or is it a peripheral problem? In this case, they opted to do HCG and TRT. So a lot of the research kind of does to combine things. And then started taking it. And what was really cool about the mark is, they take blood work so regularly. So that was something that I was really worried about. I didn't want to just be put on different hormones and changing those things and not be evaluated routinely. Like I would want to know very regularly what the hell is going on. So in the beginning phases, you're getting blood work done, I think at 1 month, 2 months after that, 3 months after that, and then at every 3-month interval, and then it's now up to 6. So once they kind of have everything dialed in, they do it every 6 months. And this is something that they provide for all of their clients. So during this time, I'm getting little adjustments here and there based on the numbers that are coming up. And during that time, I started to notice some really early changes. I started having less energy dump in the afternoon, so definitely had some more energy to kind of just like finish out my workday. And then a few weeks later, started to notice things were getting pretty strong. And within a few months, I had put on quite a bit of size. I believe I put on about 10 pounds, and I had reduced my body fat by about 3%. It was pretty stark change. I didn't really notice it until I look at some of the pictures from earlier, because I had gotten promoted to purple belt in January of last year. And so we're starting to look at things, after about 3 months of TRT, we're kind of approaching the summertime. And I'm like, dude, this is like a pretty drastic difference in just a short amount of time. So from a performance standpoint, what I thought about, that all TRT was for, I started noticing some changes right away. Much stronger, bigger lifts in the gym, was putting on size, body fat was melting off, I looked great, and I could tell my confidence was starting to build back up. And then from an emotional standpoint, I just did not have the same lows that I did before. I wasn't having these really dark thoughts nearly as often. If I had something negative that would happen, I bounced back a lot quicker. I felt a lot more even. And my highs, I just felt like I was getting happy again, and at that point I had really decided hey, this was the right move. I was still a little skeptical at first. The performance stuff wasn't enough for me to be yeah, I need to continue to do this forever. Did it feel good? Of course. Yeah, dude, I look jacked, I'm strong. But I really wanted to make sure that I didn't feel all over the place or crazy. Wanted to make sure that, my emotions were in check. Wanted to make sure that everything felt nice and solid. And I did. And on top of that, I did have some side effects early on while they're kind of sorting out the dosages. I was noticing that with putting on this incredible amount of mass in a short amount of time, I started to have a ton of joint pain. Stuff that I never had before. Just my elbows would be achy. And times after practice, just like things would be sore and it would just hurt to like, I could still pull the weight that I needed to, but it would hurt so bad in the joints that it was just like, I'd feel it. And it was something I just had to deal with. The muscles had built, but the tendons, the ligaments, the soft tissue, the fascia, they didn't have time to catch up yet. So that took some time. About a few months later, it sorted itself out. But there was a period of time where I was pushing a lot of weight. It hurt. And when I had first taken my blood work, not only was my testosterone low, but my estrogen was incredibly low, which is not good either. So when you go on TRT, it's very normal for your estrogen to also go up at the same time as well as your testosterone. And mine basically like 10x'd. So my my estrogen just like, so by the time I'd be between doses, I was going through some crazy mood swings, like super emotional. I would watch some Instagram video and just be in tears. And I'm like, bro, what the fuck is wrong with you right now? Like, I'm an emotional guy. I definitely show, like, there's nothing wrong with crying, but there was, like, some of the stuff was just sending me into a spiral. And I was like, okay, like, we need to figure out this estrogen thing. And on top of that, I was starting to also get some, like, nipple sensitivity. I'm being candid with you guys because these are things that you might deal with too. So it's very normal to experience this. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I didn't have any skin acne breakout problems. That wasn't a thing for me, but I do know if you're running a little hot, that will happen. But I was experiencing more of just the increase in the estrogen at the same time. I was having nipple sensitivity and then some pretty big emotional mood swings. Not like depressed, but I would just like get really sad and like just like cry over like little stuff. So after going on, they put me on some estrogen blockers. Shouts out to people who take estrogen blockers in IBJJF tournaments and get caught. So after taking that, much better. Those symptoms went away. Now, kind of after this like full year, I'm, in a much more like level state. Still feel really strong in the gym. I feel incredibly strong in Jiu Jitsu. I'm recovering. Even though I feel tired, I can just keep pushing. My sleep quality has gone up tremendously. Everything feels much, much better. And after my whole personal story, it's been really cool to talk to other men who have gone through this or are experiencing similar things that I felt. And I feel this kind of side quest in terms of my mission of helping grapplers out, but just advocating for men's health. We do such a horrible job of taking care of ourselves. We wait until like the very last minute to do anything. We have to hit rock bottom. We have to like be like, well, I can't function now, so let's go get help finally. And part of that is because it's hard to trust people. And, thankfully I know where my options were. But, if you were somebody who didn't understand the medical community and your doctor was like, well, you don't have testosterone problems, you have sleep apnea. Somebody may not take the extra steps to go outside of your insurance and pay out of pocket to go get blood work done. I'm just like, well, fuck this guy. He doesn't think I have testosterone problems. I'm just depressed and I need to figure it out on my own. I shouldn't have been vulnerable with him and I'm just going to suck it up moving forward. That's what most people would do. And I'm telling you, take the extra step. I'm telling you, reach out to me. If you can't find somebody who will listen to you, continue to search until somebody does. And there are a lot of people I've worked with as a rehab coach who have seen multiple providers before landing and working with me. And all I did was just simply listen to them, hear them out. If you're having symptoms of depression, if you're having suicidal ideations, if you are really thinking about, suicide, you need to call somebody. But if you're like having some dark thoughts, if you aren't recovering the same way that you used to, and you feel like you can't just like chalk it up to age or like whatever's going on, knowledge is power. If I were to do this all over again, knowing what I know now, I would have started getting blood work once a year in my 20s because wellness blood work is relatively inexpensive. A lot of insurance will cover it anyway. And that's just to rule out anything. This is to make sure you're not having any issues with your heart, metabolic diseases, all that stuff. Making sure that you're just good. Get that done once a year. If you're in your 20s, you're listening to this, please go get your blood work every year. After you start hitting your 30s, you should have a lot of data points at this point. You should have gotten blood work, hopefully at least a half dozen times, and you should be able to observe a trend. If things are trending in the wrong direction, if things are staying the same, all of a sudden there's a sudden change in something, figure out what that is, catch it, so then you can make the lifestyle changes. Once you've caught it and you've made lifestyle changes and been consistent with it for 6 months, reapply, see if it changed anything, move on. If it did, great, you made that adjustment. If you're not getting changes, that's when you need to go see another have another intervention. So if you're noticing that your testosterone is kind of slowly going down, but you're like, hey, I'm not really, lifting as much and I'm eating like shit. Okay, change that. Give yourself 6 months to recalibrate. If it's still going down, it might be time to intervene. And I want to start advocating for men to be more proactive about this stuff instead of reactive. There are things that we can do every single day. You don't have to be perfect, but if you're fairly consistent and you pay attention, you can catch things before they get to you. And as soon as we kind of hit our 30s and 40s, our chances of catching diseases, secondary comorbidities, heart disease, metabolic disease, all those different things, they start to skyrocket at that point. So knowledge is power. And thankfully, because of the mark and what I'm doing with my blood work, I'm going to be getting blood work every 6 months now while I'm going to them. They check everything. Whether I'm there, I'm either getting blood work done, my blood pressure is being taken, or I'm getting hemoglobin tests just to make sure I'm not having any side effects from the TRT. Now, speaking of side effects, while we're on the topic, if you are going through this, 2 of the biggest side effects from taking TRT are heart from stroke, because your blood thickens, you can stroke out from that. And 2, you have an increased chance of getting prostate cancer. Those are 2 of the biggest ones that come up. So if you're getting TRT, make sure that you're getting routine blood work to make sure those levels are acceptable, because you need to make adjustments accordingly. Those are things to look for when you're looking for a provider. If you are in the Chino Hills area, Inland Empire, kind of where I'm located, I 100% cannot recommend the Mark Men's Health more. They are incredibly professional from the very first contact point. They're incredibly thorough. They don't just tell you like, hey, just hop on TRT. They're not trying to make a buck off of you. They want to give you the best possible solution. And they're incredibly knowledgeable about this space. They know what adjustments need to be made. They know what things to monitor. They know how to take care of you. And I have felt so supported during this entire process that I wouldn't have wanted to go anywhere else. So if you are local to me and you are listening to this, those are definitely guys I want to check out. And I'll put their information in the show notes. They're not sponsoring this episode. I'm just plugging them because they're the shit. They have a location in Chino Hills, and I do believe in 2025 they'll be opening another location in Pasadena. So if you are in that area as well, that's another place you can look at. Outside of the Mark's Men's Health, maybe you're listening to this from across the country, you don't have a lot of access to good places. Another resource for you would be Merrick Health. Merrick Health, you've probably heard from them from various podcasts. Merrick Health is get plugged by Derek from More Plates, More Dates, Jordan Syatt, a lot of people who use them. Merrick Health is unique because they are an online service. They have a network of different providers who can read your blood work. So they'll send you to a place to get blood work done. You purchase a specific panel. That panel will then be directed to this place. They get everything that you need. And then a doctor will read everything. They'll let you know, hey, in terms of micronutrients, hormones, everything. They'll let you know how to adjust things in terms of supplementation, changes in diet. If you do need, for hormones, if you do need replacement, they can tell you what your options are, and they're incredibly thorough. It is a little bit more of an expensive service, but in somebody who, if this is something you did to kind of just get some information, the money's very well spent. Don't go out for a couple weeks. If you have any extraneous payments that you need to just remove for a bit so you can get this blood work, it's worth every penny. I know a handful of people who have used them and they're absolutely enthralled with how thorough they are. So if you're not in the local area, that is definitely an option for you. But that's my TRT journey. I'm sure there's a lot more I could have talked about, but this is what was kind of just top of mind. And hopefully you learned a little bit about the process and what it could look like. Ultimately, you know, I want you guys to advocate for your guys' health. And maybe if you come from the fence of taking this stuff is cheating, maybe you might reconsider. Yes, are there people out there that are Masters Division Jiu Jitsu athletes that use this, you know, use TRT when they don't need to? Of course. Like, I'm not stupid. But there are a genuine group of people who really need this stuff. So if you're reading comments from negative people being like, well, I don't need that, and my genetics, you know, I do this every single day, that's great. I'm telling you right now, I took care of myself. I did the things I was supposed to be doing. I'm in better shape than a majority of people on the planet, other than, you know, the few freaks. And I still had low T. I didn't pick my parents well. There is a genetic component to this that will supersede everything else that you do. So what I am recommending, do your due diligence. There are things that you are in control of. You are in control of going to bed and hopefully getting 7 hours a night. I understand there's some jobs that don't require that, but to the best of your ability, getting at least 7 hours a night of sleep. Making sure you're hitting your protein intake, making sure you have a well-balanced diet that's not full of, you know, highly palatable, hypercaloric things. You don't need to be eating a ton of processed foods, fried foods, those types of things. Trying to make sure that your meals are coming from things that are grown in the ground, fruits, vegetables, meat, all the different things. And making sure you're exercising. You know, if you're participating in jiu-jitsu and lifting weights a couple times a week, you're probably doing okay. And on top of that, you know, a routine sex life is good. It helps boost your testosterone naturally as well. So more excuses for that. But if you're doing your due diligence, address that first. I'm not saying, hey, if you feel this way, you know, go on TRT. Go through the steps. Make sure you're doing your due diligence. It's okay to get blood work right away. Get the knowledge, have the numbers, make the changes that you need to change. And then if those don't change to the point where you need it to, might be time to consider something else. But it's my story, man. I appreciate you guys hearing me out. If you've listened this long, if you have any questions around TRT, I will share with you every single detail that you want to know. I gave you the pretty good rundown of it, but if you need more specific, I will run it down for you. Please feel free to reach out. You can always reach out to me on Instagram, send me a DM. If you ever want to book a call with me, links in the show notes. But until next time, remember, pain is a privilege. We don't need to fear it. We just need to respect it. Next episode. See you.